What's up, family? This is your man, not your boy, bringing you another gold nugget that you can either pick up or you can just kick it aside. You know, I want to share this video with y'all because this might be another piece of the puzzle for many of us who realize that the Europeans, the whites, the Caucasians, who have done a devastation around the world, that many countries are talking about reparations and how they owe them. But it's interesting that India, in their mouth, speaks of the devastation that they have been left in when the Brits uprooted and left. But not only that, but even the 3 million Africans that were brought in as slaves over to India. But what I find interesting is when the gentleman says that God don't even trust a Brit man in the dark, the white man, the Caucasian. Check the video out and I'll be back.
1765 and 1938, the British Isles stole $45 trillion pounds from India. 45 trillion sterling from India. We never got paid for that. When the British left India, when we threw the British out, our literacy rate was 13%. So much for several hundred years of so-called civilization. Meanwhile, our landscapes were destroyed. And then you left, and now you dare to condescend to us. You love lecturing us because you have a colonial mentality. Then there are colonial structures and institutions. You lend us money, and every time you lend us money, which is our money, every time the International Monetary Fund comes to our societies and they tell us, here's the money we are giving you, no, it's our money. You give us our money back as debt, and then you lecture us about how we should live. You want to lecture us, you want to tell us that we are responsible for all the problems because you'll never accept that you're the one principally to blame.
India's share of the world economy when Britain arrived on its shores was 23%. By the time the British left, it was down to below 4%. Why? Simply because India had been governed for the benefit of Britain. Britain's rise for 200 years was financed by its depredations in India. And India went from being a world-famous exporter of finished cloth into an importer. Went from having 27% of world trade to less than 2%. The fact is that India was already Britain's biggest cash cow, the world's biggest purchaser of British goods and exports, and the source of highly paid employment for British civil servants. We literally paid for our own oppression. And as has been pointed out, the wealthy Victorian British families that made their money out of the slave economy, 1/5 of the elites of the wealthy class in Britain in the 19th century owed their money to transporting 3 million Africans across the waters. And in fact, in 1833, when slavery was abolished, what happened was that a compensation of £20 million was paid, not as reparations to those who had lost their lives or who had suffered or been oppressed by slavery, but to those who had lost their property. Between 15 and 29 million Indians died of starvation in British-induced famines. The most famous example, of course, was the Great Bengal Famine during the Second World War, when 4 million people died because Winston Churchill deliberately, as a matter of written minuted policy, proceeded to divert essential supplies from civilians in Bengal to sturdy Tommies and Europeans as reserve stockpiles. He said that the starvation of anyway underfed Bengalis mattered much less than that of sturdy Greeks. This is Churchill's actual quote. And when conscience-stricken British officials wrote to him, pointing out that people were dying because of this decision, he peevishly wrote in the margins of the file, "Why hasn't Gandhi died yet?" As others have said on the proposition, violence and racism were the reality of the colonial experience. And no wonder that the sun never set on the British Empire, because even God couldn't trust the English in the dark. Now, we've heard other arguments on this side. There's been a mention of the railways. Well, let me tell you, first of all, as my colleague, the Jamaican High Commissioner, has pointed out, railways and roads were really built to serve British interests and not those of the local people. But I might add that many countries have built railways and roads without having had to be colonized in order to do so. They were designed to carry raw materials from the hinterland into the ports to be shipped to Britain. And the fact is that the Indian or Jamaican or other colonial public, their needs were incidental. Transportation, there was no attempt made to match supply to demand for mass transport, none whatsoever. There have been incidents of racial violence, of loot, of massacres, of bloodshed, of transportation, in India's case, even of one of our last Mughal emperor. Yes, maybe today's Britons are not responsible for some of these depredations, but the same speakers have pointed with pride to their foreign aid. You're not responsible for the people starving in Somalia, but you give them aid. Surely the principle of reparations for the wrongs that have been done cannot be denied. It's been pointed out, for example, the dehumanization of Africans in the Caribbean, the massive psychological damage that has been done, the undermining of social traditions, of property rights, of the authority structures of these societies, all in the interests of British colonialism. And the fact remains that many of today's problems in these countries, including the persistence, in some cases the creation of racial and ethnic and religious tensions, were the direct result of the colonial experience. So there is a moral debt that needs to be paid. There was reference to democracy and rule of law. Let me say with the greatest possible respect, it's a bit rich to oppress, enslave, kill, torture, maim people for 200 years and then celebrate the fact that they're democratic at the end of it. We were denied democracy, sir. We had to snatch it, seize it from you. With the greatest reluctance, it was conceded in India's case after 150 years of British rule, and that too with limited franchise. We are not talking about reparations as a tool to empower anybody. They're a tool for you to atone for the wrongs that have been done. The proposition before this House is the principle of owing reparations, not the fine points of how much is owed, to whom it should be paid. The question is there a debt? Does Britain owe reparations? As far as I'm concerned, the ability to acknowledge a wrong that has been done, to simply say sorry, will go a far, far, far longer way than some percentage of GDP in the form of aid. What is required, it seems to me, is accepting the principle that reparations are owed.
I'll just say in closing, reparations, I like to call it restitution, especially in America, being restored back to where you were or where you would be according today. And all that you might have missed out on, education, jobs, housing, medical, all of these things that can be easily put together, especially when the country is shifting and sending billions of dollars over to Israel or Ukraine. So it's not impossible. So I'm saying, whether these European countries or America or whatever want to have a disregard for those who are of color, don't hold your breath. We still can achieve if we unite together and overcome and succeed. This is your man, not your boy, bringing you another gold nugget that you can either pick up or you can just kick it aside.